Imagine saving up for months, finally deciding that today is the day you'll buy a brand new MacBook. You open Apple's website, choose the exact model you've been watching, and then you freeze. The price is higher, not because you selected a better version, not because you added extra storage. The exact same product now costs significantly more than it did just days ago. For millions of Apple customers, that's exactly what happened. Almost overnight, Apple increased the prices of several products in multiple markets, and naturally, people started asking the same question. Why? Was Apple simply trying to make more money? Was this just another premium brand taking advantage of loyal customers? Or is something much bigger happening behind the scenes? Because here's something interesting. Apple doesn't usually increase prices without a reason. In fact, the company has spent years protecting its premium image while carefully avoiding sudden price hikes whenever possible. So, when Apple decides to charge more, Wall Street pays attention, investors pay attention, and maybe so should you. Welcome back to Jackson Invest, where we uncover the biggest stories in business, investing, and money through simple documentary-style storytelling. If you enjoy understanding the businesses that shape our world, not just the headlines, make sure to subscribe, because every episode reveals the story behind the numbers. Now, here's something that might surprise you. This isn't just a story about Apple. It's a story about the future of technology, the future of artificial intelligence, the global supply chain, and why your next laptop, your next smartphone, or even your next gaming PC could cost more than you expect. Because Apple isn't the only company facing this problem. Microsoft is, Dell is, HP is, Samsung is. Almost the entire technology industry is dealing with the same challenge, and it all starts with one tiny component. A component so small, you never even think about it. Yet, without it, your phone, your laptop, and even the world's most advanced AI systems simply wouldn't work. That tiny component has suddenly become one of the most valuable pieces of technology on Earth, and it's forcing some of the world's biggest companies to make decisions they hoped they'd never have to make, including Apple. But before we understand why Apple raised its prices, we first need to answer another question. How did Apple become a company that can raise prices and still convince millions of people to keep buying? Because that's where the real story begins. To understand why Apple suddenly raised prices, we first need to understand something about Apple that most people completely misunderstand. Apple doesn't compete by being the cheapest. It never has. In fact, if you compare Apple products with similar devices from other companies, there's almost always a cheaper option. Want a smartphone? There are dozens of Android phones that cost far less than an iPhone. Need a laptop? You'll find Windows laptops with similar specifications at much lower prices. So, here's the obvious question. If Apple isn't the cheapest, why do people keep buying it? The answer isn't the hardware. It isn't the logo. And it definitely isn't just the camera. The answer is something every successful business dreams of having. Pricing power. Pricing power is the ability to increase prices without losing most of your customers. Very few companies have it. Think about it. If a small coffee shop suddenly doubles the price of its coffee, customers will probably walk across the street to another cafe. If an unknown phone company increases its prices, buyers simply choose another brand. But Apple plays by different rules. Millions of people don't just buy an iPhone. They buy into an ecosystem. Your iPhone talks to your MacBook. Your MacBook connects instantly to your AirPods. Your Apple Watch unlocks your computer. Your photos, messages, passwords, and files sync automatically across every device. The more Apple products you own, the harder it becomes to leave. Economists call this the switching cost. The higher the switching cost, the more pricing power a company has. And Apple has spent nearly 2 decades building one of the strongest ecosystems in business history. That's why Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway, invested hundreds of billions of dollars into Apple over the years. Not because Apple makes the fastest phones, but because Apple has something investors love: loyal customers. Every September, millions of people line up to buy a new iPhone. Even when the previous model works perfectly, every year, Apple proves something remarkable. People aren't only buying technology, they're buying trust, they're buying convenience, they're buying an experience. And that's exactly why investors watch Apple so closely. Because when a company has enough price pricing power to raise prices without causing a major drop in demand. It's one of the strongest competitive advantages any business can have. But this time, something felt different. Apple didn't raise prices simply because it could. Behind the scenes, its own costs were rising too. The question is, what became so expensive that even Apple decided it couldn't absorb the extra cost anymore? The answer starts inside massive AI data centers, where an invisible battle for computer chips is taking place. And that battle is changing the price of technology for everyone. So, what exactly forced Apple to raise its prices? Was it simply trying to make more profit? Not quite. The real answer begins thousands of miles away, inside massive buildings filled with tens of thousands of computer chips. These buildings are called AI data centers. Companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, and OpenAI are spending billions of dollars building artificial intelligence. Every time you ask an AI a question, generate an image, or create a video, powerful computers are working behind the scenes. And those computers need one thing more than anything else: memory. Not human memory, computer memory, high-performance DRAM, and NAND storage chips. These tiny components help AI systems process enormous amounts of information at incredible speeds. Just a few years ago, memory manufacturers mainly supplied smartphones, laptops, gaming PCs, and tablets. But today, AI companies are buying these chips faster than factories can produce them. Imagine a city where everyone suddenly wants to buy the same house. What happens? Prices rise. Now imagine the same thing happening with memory chips. When demand explodes, manufacturers naturally prioritize the customers willing to pay the highest prices. And today, those customers are AI companies building billion-dollar data centers. That creates a ripple effect across the entire technology industry. Laptop manufacturers pay more, tablet manufacturers pay more, PC builders pay more, and eventually, consumers pay more. Apple isn't immune to that reality. Every MacBook, every iPad, and every premium device relies on high-performance memory and storage. When the cost of those components increases, Apple has only a few choices: reduce its profit margins, cut costs somewhere else, or increase prices. For years, Apple absorbed many rising costs without making dramatic price changes. But this time, the pressure became too significant to ignore. And here's what's fascinating. This isn't just an Apple story. It's a story about how the AI revolution is quietly reshaping the entire technology industry. Every breakthrough in artificial intelligence requires more powerful hardware, more servers, more advanced chips, more memory. The companies building AI are racing to buy as much computing power as possible. And as that race accelerates, the cost of producing everyday technology continues to rise. But if component prices are increasing for everyone, why does Apple seem to raise prices without losing millions of customers? The answer has very little to do with technology and everything to do with psychology. Because Apple isn't just selling products, it's selling something far more valuable. If rising costs were the only reason behind Apple's price increase, then every technology company would face the exact same problem. And they do. But very few companies can respond the way Apple does, because Apple isn't just selling hardware, it's selling an ecosystem. Imagine you've owned an iPhone for the last 5 years. Your photos are stored in iCloud. Your passwords are saved in Apple's password manager. Your AirPods switch automatically between your iPhone and MacBook. Your Apple Watch unlocks your Mac. Your notes, contacts, calendars, and messages are synchronized across every device. Now ask yourself one simple question. How easy would it be to leave? For many people, the answer is not very easy. This is what economists call a high switching cost. The more products and services you depend on, the harder it becomes to move to another brand. And Apple has spent decades building exactly that. Every new product strengthens the ecosystem. Every software update connects devices even more closely. Every subscription, whether it's iCloud, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, or AppleCare, adds another reason to stay. Over time, customers stop comparing prices. Instead, they compare convenience. That's one of the biggest competitive advantages any company can have. Because when customers stop asking, what's the cheapest option, and start asking, what's the easiest option, price becomes less important. Investors have a name for this: pricing power. Pricing power is the ability to raise prices without losing a significant number of customers. It's one of the reasons companies like Apple are so valuable. Think about luxury brands. When a luxury watch company increases prices, many customers don't stop buying. Sometimes, higher prices make the brand feel even more exclusive. Apple isn't a luxury brand in the traditional sense, but it benefits from a similar psychology. Its products have become symbols of reliability, quality, and long-term support. That trust gives Apple flexibility that many competitors simply don't have. But here's the interesting part. Even with strong pricing power, Apple knows there's a limit. Raise prices too aggressively, and consumers start delaying upgrades. Keep prices too low, and profit margins begin to shrink. Finding the perfect balance is one of the hardest decisions any business can make. And that's exactly what Apple is trying to do today. The recent price increases aren't just about making more money. They're about protecting one of the most profitable business models ever created, while adapting to a world where AI is changing the economics of technology. But this raises another important question. If Apple can successfully increase prices today, what does that mean for the future? Will iPhones become more expensive? Will laptops across the industry continue to rise in price? Or is this just the beginning of a much bigger shift in the tech world? So, what happens next? Is this just a temporary price increase, or are expensive Apple products becoming the new normal? To answer that, we need to look beyond Apple, because this isn't just one company's problem anymore. The entire technology industry is changing. Over the past few years, artificial intelligence has become the biggest investment opportunity in tech. Companies are spending hundreds of billions of dollars building AI infrastructure. New data centers are being built across the United States. Chip manufacturers are expanding production. Cloud providers are buying more computing power than ever before, and that demand isn't slowing down. Every new AI model requires faster processors, more memory, more storage, and significantly more electricity. As long as AI investment continues growing, the competition for advanced hardware is likely to remain intense. That means companies like Apple will continue facing higher production costs. Of course, Apple has advantages that many competitors don't. Its massive supply chain, its long-term agreements with suppliers, and its incredible profit margins help absorb some of those costs. But even Apple can't escape basic economics forever. When producing a product becomes more expensive, businesses eventually have to make difficult decisions, either reduce profits or pass part of those costs to customers. That's exactly why investors pay so much attention to Apple's pricing decisions, because they reveal something much bigger than the price of a MacBook. They reveal how confident Apple is in its business. If customers continue buying despite higher prices, it tells investors that Apple's brand remains incredibly strong. If demand begins to slow, Apple may have to rethink its strategy. And that's why every earnings report, every product launch, and every pricing decision is closely watched on Wall Street. But here's the biggest lesson from this story. Most people think Apple sells technology. Investors know Apple sells something much more valuable: trust. People trust that an iPhone will work. They trust that a MacBook will receive software updates for years. They trust the ecosystem. And in business, trust often creates pricing power. That's why Warren Buffett once described Apple as more than just a technology company. It's a consumer brand with extraordinary customer loyalty. That loyalty is one of the biggest competitive advantages any company can build, and it's the reason millions of people continue choosing Apple, even when prices go up. But what does this story teach ordinary investors? The answer has very little to do with buying an iPhone, and everything to do with understanding great businesses. Now let's answer the question we started with. Why did Apple suddenly raise its prices? Was it because Apple became greedy? No. Was it because Tim Cook wanted to make more money? Not exactly. The truth is far more complicated. Apple operates one of the most complex supply chains ever created. Thousands of suppliers, hundreds of factories, millions of components, dozens of countries. When just one part of that system becomes more expensive, the effect spreads throughout the entire business. And that's exactly what's happening today. The explosive growth of artificial intelligence has changed the economics of the technology industry. Advanced memory chips, high-performance storage, and powerful processors have become some of the most valuable components in the world. At the same time, global manufacturing costs remain under pressure. Shipping costs fluctuate, labor costs continue rising, and geopolitical tensions make supply chains even more unpredictable. For a company selling hundreds of millions of devices every year, even a small increase in production costs can translate into billions of dollars. That's why Apple constantly faces a difficult choice. Should it absorb the higher costs or ask customers to pay more? This time, Apple chose a balance between the two. Some costs were absorbed by the company, others were reflected in higher prices for certain products and configurations. But here's the lesson lesson most people miss. Successful companies don't simply raise prices because they can. They raise prices only when they're confident customers will continue to see value. That's the difference between a strong business and an ordinary one. Apple has spent decades building trust. That's why millions of customers don't just compare prices, they compare experiences. And as long as Apple continues delivering that experience, many customers will continue paying a premium. But investors should never focus only on the price tag. Instead, they should ask a much better question. What gives this company the power to increase prices without losing its customers? Because that's where long-term value is created, and Apple is one of the best examples of that principle in the modern world. But there's one final lesson from this story, a lesson that every investor can apply, not just to Apple, but to any business they choose to invest in. So, what's the biggest lesson from Apple's latest price increase? Believe it or not, it's not really about Apple. It's about understanding how truly great businesses operate. Most people see a higher price tag and immediately think everything is getting too expensive. But investors ask a completely different question. Why can this company charge more while everyone else is competing to lower prices? That single question separates consumers from investors, because every successful company eventually reaches a crossroad. It can compete on price, or it can compete on value. Companies that compete on price are trapped in a never-ending battle. They offer bigger discounts, lower prices, smaller profit margins. They're constantly trying to become the cheapest option. But businesses with strong brands don't have to play that game. People don't buy Nike because it's the cheapest shoe. They don't buy Starbucks because it serves the cheapest coffee. And they don't buy Apple because it sells the cheapest laptop. They buy these brands because they believe they're getting something worth paying for. That's what creates one of the most valuable business advantages in the world: pricing power. The ability to increase prices without losing the trust of your customers. Think about it. If Apple raises the price of a MacBook by a few $100s and millions of customers still decide to buy it, that creates billions of dollars in additional revenue without selling millions of extra devices. That's the kind of business investors dream about. But pricing power isn't created overnight. Apple spent decades earning customer trust, designing products people genuinely enjoy using, building an ecosystem that's difficult to leave, supporting devices for years through software updates, and creating an experience that competitors still struggle to replicate. Investors call this a moat, a competitive advantage that protects a business from its competitors. For Apple, that moat isn't just the iPhone, it's the ecosystem, the brand, customer loyalty, its software, its services, its retail stores, its global supply chain. Every piece strengthens the business and makes it harder to copy. That's why long-term investors don't simply study products, they study businesses. Because the companies that create lasting wealth aren't always the fastest growing. They're often the ones with the strongest competitive advantages. And that's the real story behind Apple's latest price increase. It's not just another headline. It's proof that exceptional businesses can adapt to changing markets while protecting both their customers' trust and their own profitability. So whether you're buying your next laptop, thinking about upgrading your phone, or simply trying to become a better investor, remember this: never judge a business by its price tag alone. Instead, ask yourself, what gives this company the confidence to charge more? Because behind every premium price, there's usually a business strategy most people never notice. Sometimes it's innovation, sometimes it's branding, sometimes it's customer loyalty, and sometimes it's decades of earning trust. That's why smart investors don't chase headlines. They study management, they study competitive advantages, and they focus on businesses that can continue creating value for years, not just quarters. If you enjoyed this documentary and learned something new, don't forget to like this video. And if you want more business, investing, and finance documentaries explained in a simple way, subscribe to Jackson Invest and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay informed, because the more you understand great businesses today, the better financial decisions you'll make tomorrow.